Perfect. You'd think I'll be better at this after having been through Zoom for a couple of years, but well, awesome. Great. Hello and welcome everyone to our panel discussion today. I'm Kalyan, co-founder and CEO of AlmaBase. I hope you're all doing well and enjoying the fall. Before I introduce my wonderful co-panelists, let me quickly walk you through the logistics of how this will work while more people are trickling in. So as attendees, all of you are muted by default and your videos are off. We can't see you, unfortunately. Only panelists, the three of us, are unmuted and our videos are on. And you can actually feel free to ask questions anytime during the webinar. You don't have to hold them to the end. And to ask a question, let's just keep this simple. You can just type it out on the chat below, and we'll respond to the questions as soon as we're able to during the webinar. And as you see, we're recording this, and a recording of the session will be sent to all of you after the webinar. So hopefully, you're not taking notes. You can just sit back and listen in. Like I said, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by what I consider two of the best minds in the industry today. Dr. Maria Gallo is the founder and principal of KITE, Keep in Touch Education. That's a consultancy that's at the forefront of research and thought leadership in alumni relations and engagement. And with over 20 years of experience working in various leadership roles in higher education and advancement, Maria brings expert insights and unique perspectives to the table through her content and resources and books. And besides having an active research portfolio, Maria also has several peer-reviewed academic journal publications in alumni relationships and philanthropy. And most recently, most of you probably already know this, Maria authored a book called The Alumni Way, Building Lifelong Value from Your University Investment. There you go. We actually have a special gift for all of you at the end of the webinar, so watch out for that. Maria, once again, I'm delighted to be joined by you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And my other co-panelist, the wonderful Dr. Kevin Fleming, is the co-founder and CEO at Prosper Nonprofit Advisors. It's a consulting firm that provides philanthropic guidance to nonprofit organizations. And Dr. Kevin has over 20 years of experience in the alumni relations and nonprofit space. And he's worked with a number of institutions to transform overall alumni engagement, communication strategies, volunteer programs, and event planning. And his groundbreaking theory called the Pots of Water Framework for Alumni Engagement in the Journal of Philanthropy and Education, I believe is a must read. Kevin, once again, thank you for joining us. I look forward to learning more from you today.
Thanks so much. And I've got like the two people who read my paper here on the call. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we're able to have this conversation today. At AlmaBase, we're always looking for ways to support and grow the alumni relations and advancement profession. I'm very passionate about doing this because it all started with my own personal experience. About 14 years ago now, in 2007, my co-founder Sri and I met in college as students, and this is in India. That's where we're from. And while we were still in college, we actually got involved in a situation where, we personally sort of struggled with a lack of scholarships. And at that point, we ended up essentially contacting alumni and raising funds to prevent several students from being forced to drop out. And we ended up sort of establishing a nonprofit organization to continue that effort. But through that entire experience, what we realized is the relationship between alumni and their alma maters was broken, not just at our institution, but at a lot of educational institutions globally. And that's what sort of led to the creation of AlmaBase. So our mission, today continues to be the same, which is how can we help educational institutions make their education more accessible and affordable to everyone by driving more participation from alumni, right? And we're fortunate to be serving hundreds of universities and schools at this point, helping them cultivate meaningful lifelong relationships with their alumni. Honestly, I'm really, really glad that we're able to catch up about this specific topic today. It's fantastic as always to see so many of you joining us today welcome again. And I'd love to dive in. Let me stop sharing my screen so that you can see all of us better. And we can sort of dive into the questions. Maria, I'll probably start with you. What does being alumni-centric mean to you?
Kelly, what a great question. I love that we're starting with the alumni-centered and alumni-centric question. For me, it's really alumni at the heart of our institutions. To me, that is a really important, we often talk about students at the center of our institutions. That's usually the kind of what's typical. And I'd be kind of wondering, why not talk about our alumni at the center? Because really, at the end of the day, our alumni and the aspirations that our institutions have, they embody those values that we want, that our institutions kind of aspire to be, is all kind of wrapped up in our alumni. So if you can imagine holding up a mirror, what reflects back is your alumni base, your alumni community. So to me, that's the reason for being alumni-centric, is really to kind of be, that every part of the university, it's diffused on thinking about alumni in everything that's being done on campus. So it's kind of a tall ask, but the idea that it's always defaulted to an alumni relations or a development or an advancement function, to me, I think those days are gone. We need to be thinking much bigger, much bolder.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know, Kevin, you have done research on factors that comprise alumni engagement and how they inform alumni relationships with their alma maters. So how do you think about what does it mean to be alumni-centric?
Yeah, for me, it's really about having a true understanding about the ways that your alumni want to be involved in and contribute to the life of the university. And within that, there's a few different elements. First is, how are you involving your alumni in identifying the gaps in how you serve them, as well as how you involve them in generating the solutions and ideating about how you solve those gaps. So, if you think about it, when is the last time you surveyed your alumni or done focus groups? Even if it was 2 years ago, a lot has changed. A lot has changed in the last 2 years, right? So our alumni, our situations, our circumstances evolve quite quickly. So involving them in your gaps and how to generate solutions for that. It means also having a deeper level of understanding about the feedback you're getting from alumni. So I think about some circumstances where I've been at boards who said, we really want to mentor. We want a mentoring program. But when you ask a little bit behind what does mentoring mean to them, it doesn't always have the same meaning, right? So to me, a mentoring relationship is really in-depth, ongoing, no time, it's not time specific. Whereas when we talk to them, they really wanted meaningful, finite opportunities to interact with students, give advice, and then maybe a true mentoring relationship developed. But that's not exactly what they meant when they first were saying, we want a mentor. So really getting to that deeper level of understanding what their feedback is. And it means involving alumni in ways that they are passionate about, along with timelines that they're comfortable with. So I think some of our shortcomings in the industry, if you talk about development, right, it's a high turnover profession. Most people last a couple of years in their position, and there's pressure to make an ask. There's institutional pressure to get fundraising, but oftentimes we're making asks for things that may not necessarily fit quite well with interest, or in a timeline that does not actually lend itself to where the relationship stage is. So really understanding the pace and the ways people want to be involved. Similarly with volunteering, oftentimes we ask those people that we know are going to say yes, but an opportunity may not really lie within their wheelhouse. It's making sure that we're involving alumni in ways that the relationship makes sense rather than institutional need. And then the fourth piece that I'll say is just making sense of your data, which is where solutions like AlmaBase comes in, right? We are phenomenal at storing data. I mean, we will ask staff to do the minutia of storing data all day long, but then making sense of it. There's so much that we can do to understand strategies for involving and engaging alumni in their own personal way. But we just haven't really, as an industry, figured out how to do that.
Yeah, some great points there. Especially love, how you spoke about, like we talk about something like a mentorship program very broadly without really understanding what exactly our alumni care about. Maria, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just, I mean, I love the idea of that co-creation idea. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thinking about how we can kind of do that co-creation, and that takes a leap of faith, because it can be really scary to kind of involve alumni, but it actually reaps immense benefits. And, I'm kind of a little bit of a, alumni reunion junkie before like the pandemic. I just love going to reunions, can't help it. And when I go, I'm amazed at the people who are they're so hungry. They have this appetite to really want to get involved and to do things, but they feel like A, they're not being asked, and B, they kind of just don't know where they fit in. And that where it is that, and sometimes there are some kind of square pegs and round holes that kind of happen. So there's like these kind of square pegs. And then, we're, as our alumni, and then, we have these round holes and we can't seem to fit them in properly. And really, we have to be thinking about that kind of mutually beneficial prospect out of that. How can we, and, how we create our alumni as shareholders in our institution, as opposed to thinking of them as just stakeholders. They're not just stakeholders. They are the whole kind of, raison d'etre for our institutions. We often say it's students, but I really do believe it's our alumni, because at the end of the day, that's where we want all our students to end up, is as fabulous alumni.
Yeah.
And I would just add on that, part of our industry hubris, right, is that we feel like we have a tacit understanding of, this is what our alumni need, and this is how we're going to solve it, right? It's really easy to do that. And I really like what you said, Maria, about the fear of asking alumni. But if you're at those reunions, if you ask alumni, what do you think we should be doing? They'll tell you. So, but we have a little bit of, a hubris about us that says, we know what you need and we're going to serve you this way, without involving them in that process.
And I think the other thing to that is also, when we talk about our alumni community, especially, over the years, as alumni communities have grown in size, we've got tens of thousands of graduates. The nuance around, okay, this segment of our alumni population cares about this thing, this segment of our alumni population cares about this thing, is also very important. And not just talking about the entire alumni community as one body, right? Because different parts of those populations care about different things. And one thing that I'd maybe like to add, and maybe a visual will help here. Let me just quickly share my screen. I often use this visual to talk about what it means to be alumni-centric. And, traditionally, universities and schools have primarily sort of relied on events as alumni engagement programming. And most of our communication usually is about us and what we want, and less about what's in it for them, right? And if you look at sort of the declining trend in alumni participation or alumni donation rates, one of the key factors is alumni are asking, why should I stay connected? Why should I give back to my alma mater instead of 10 other nonprofits whose causes I care about, right? And traditionally, the answer from educational institutions was loyalty, right? Unfortunately, loyalty alone is no longer sufficient, right? If you're creating a development program that is going to heavily lean on purely loyalty, it's going to be a struggle, right? And the focus has shifted a lot more to an exchange of value, right? And like you both spoke about, every relationship is a two-way street, right? The question, to be asking is, how can the relationship between the alum and the alma mater be valuable to both parties, right? Like how can we ask that question? What do my alumni care about? And then start to create services and experiences that cater to those needs, as opposed to just sort of blindly doing whatever's always been done, traditionally, right? And I think for me, that's the essence of being alumni-centric, right? One question that I'd love to, and I see plenty of audience members also contributing to the conversation, which is great. Please keep that going. And, one question I have for both of you is, what makes it hard for institutions to be alumni-centric? You spoke about a few things, tradition, but not also like the pressure to make an ask, things like that. What else can we sort of talk about here in terms of why is it hard to be alumni-centric?
For me, I'll jump in and say, in some sense, precedent, right? Higher education institutions are very tradition based. And so if you do something once, it's now a tradition. So sometimes breaking that mold is tough to do in higher education institutions, and to think a little differently, or to, to cease a program and shift your resources. I would also say resource allocation is a challenge that virtually every office that I've ever worked with is really struggling with, right? How do I, not only make the most of my time, but how do I take time to stop and think about how I take the best use of my time? It's sometimes difficult for advancement professionals to get the institution to realize that it is an investment in how to grow the institution, investing in the resources that you have, whether that's people, whether that's, solutions like Alma-Base. Like, what is it that you can say to get your institution to realize this is how we move forward? It's not an albatross around our neck, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of that comes down to leadership too. Of course, it's like you have incredible leadership, at the top table of the institution, but also within your advancement team, that they can recognize that there is immense value of having alumni at the center of a lot of the work that's happening, whether that's the work, as you described, Callian, in your diagram, at the center of, even your advancement office, but indeed, even if it goes beyond that, and, we start to think about how alumni can be the center, in our work within our institution. So we can be looking at students and alumni together as part of that kind of alumni-centric model. And I think if you have leadership, that becomes a trickle down, right? So that really helps helps that to happen. So I think that will help. But I always say, one of the challenges, and this is like sneak preview to the end, but I think I'll just say it now, is that this idea of take a look at your institution's strategic plan. How are alumni positioned in that plan? How are they mentioned in the plan? And to me, I would always say fireside reading, because I live in Ireland. We have a big roaring turf fire at this time of year and all this kind of stuff. But sit in front of the fire and read your strategic plan of your institution and look about how they're positioning. I wrote an academic paper on this idea, but I would challenge anybody out there to do that. And that gives you a sense on where your alumni are positioned within your institution already, and where you need to kind of move things. So whether it's you, or you can find those influencers or champions that can help you make that move, that will help you. And it gives you a chance of saying, well, what do I want the next strategic plan? How would I like our alumni to be positioned in that next plan?
Yeah.
And I think alumni are evaluating what your communications are saying about how they fit in, right? They're seeing, do I fit here? Do I see myself and my interests? Is the institution just saying, here's how you can help serve the institution? Or is the institution saying, here's how we serve you as well? And how do those values align with the values of the individual? And how do they make an impact and contribute to that community?
I had an experience very recently, and it kind of links with Tom's post there in the chat, that we can no longer talk at our audience and we have to kind of co-build with them. Is I had a conversation with an academic, a group of academics, talking about, why an alumni engagement strategy for their business school would be valuable. And what really kind of was the light bulb moment for them was, I was saying, well, a lot of your alumni are probably out doing research too, and other institutions. So imagine all of those connections that you can have and the collaborations. And it hadn't occurred to them that there was an opportunity to have those kind of connections with alumni, because they only view alumni in kind of one kind of static way. So this idea of being able to kind of, change our perception of what alumni means for a lot of the people that work in institutions, like what Kevin was saying, it's like so traditional that we think of them as, people going to reunions. And actually they're out there doing incredible things in industry and in academia and in nonprofits and, and. So we need to kind of think about, what that can, how that can actually, how we can have like a really nice ecosystem that happens within our institution by connecting these people.
And Kalyan, I know you have like probably several other questions you
That's
want to ask.
fine. I love the conversation. Yeah.
There's also a little bit of sometimes this dynamic of nimbleness and control, right? So I've often seen some of the greatest initiatives institutions do bubble up from the ideas of alumni or just meeting them in the spaces that they are. And I've also sometimes seen tension between institutions then wanting to co-opt them and own them in ways that like actually counteract the genuineness that first got an alumni involved. So sometimes there's, you have to really be careful about how you incorporate organic alumni initiatives so that they are aligned with you, but also are flourishing the way they were intended to do that. So
yeah, I love for me, the idea of sort of co-creation or co-building, right? I think that literally needs to be part of every sort of advancement conference that we do going forward. I think that's a great idea. And also what Maria spoke about in terms of your alumni are out there doing amazing things, right? And I have a follow-up question to that, Maria, for you.
Sure.
Like, how do you think institutions should think about educating their alumni to realize their true alumni potential, right? You use this word alumni-ness, right? Like, can you expand on that a little bit or talk about how institutions can educate their alumni?
Besides everybody reading my book, every single alum reading my book, which I think would be the most valuable thing that they can do. And there it is again. I just ingest, but not ingest, because I think it's important that we actually think about, why do we assume or presume that all of our alumni understand what being an alum is about? We have this kind of presumption. And I think even, being from North America and now living in Europe, in Europe, there seems to be more of this kind of education happening about what the word means and what, you can actually do. And that we seem to think that it's just intuitive, that people just know when they graduate that they're going to have this kind of level of alumni-ness and that. But in fact, most people don't think about that. And, they don't think about their connections. And when you think about the amount that people, invest in their higher education experience, as early as kindergarten, people are making choices about their university, experience, and tutoring and all these kind of things that are happening so early in their lives. And then they get to university and they go, phew, I got into where I want to go. And they're delighted. And then they move on and they graduate. And it's another big sigh of relief because they've gotten this big parchment. And then they just feel like they don't want to darken the door of the institution again. And to me, that's so puzzling. But when people don't know the game that they're playing, and for a lot of people that might be from first in family institutions, or that are people that may be more underrepresented in universities or international students, this is the reality. Or actually, I see some people on the call that are actually not in traditional colleges or universities, but in fact are in organizations that are using the alumni term. We have to kind of just be educating people on what alumni-ness means. And to me, it really is linked to that identity piece, at least that is for me. That idea that, we have to internalize that is part of who we are. So, we might be a parent and we might be lots of other things in our lives, and we have to kind of connect with that feeling. And that feeling, as a lot of the research would suggest, and I know you've had Jay Dillon as part of your panels before, and he talks about this idea of alumni identity and this idea that if you want action to happen, it has to be part of who you are. So I think that that's part of the alumni-ness, is that people then can decide, and it gives people real agency, like real control over saying, you know what, I graduated and what am I going to get out of that experience? And I don't think we should be afraid of this in this sector. I think it can be really scary when you think, oh, what are they going to ask us for? Are we prepared in our institutions? I'm saying, well, maybe that's what we need. For this co-creation to happen, we need to kind of, give that education to our alumni so that they feel empowered, that they can make these decisions and be, have this alumni-ness as part of who they are.
Yeah. If I could jump in on sort of the point, so many good points ever, as usual. It's a tough act to follow. But, talking about educating people on their alumni-ness and the value of alumni, I think there's a few ways that we really kind of miss the boat as an industry. One is connecting with students. I think it's espoused that we do, but we don't often do that, right? So you've got a captive audience that is literally active participants in your community. And that is the perfect time to tell them and show them that you can continue to be an active participant in this community for your entire lifetime. You'll often see if budgets get slashed, the student programming budget is the first one to get cut. You'll see one person overseeing student programs and trying to do 65 different things. So we give short shrift to how we educate and introduce students to becoming good alumni. Secondly, connect them with other alumni, right? Get alumni back, get alumni as examples of how to, participate in the community, but also get alumni talking about how much the institution has meant to them, how much it helped them grow, how it, informed their career path and their personal lives and their sense of fulfillment. And I think we really have to be good storytellers. That's what we really need to be. I mean, the best way to show the impact your alumni network can have is to share stories of those who have employed their network creatively and used it to advance their interests, their careers, whatever it may be. But be good storytellers, So those are the ways that I would say we need to educate.
And just that it can seem really scary. I 100% agree with that. And that's why I put in the chat about alum from day one. And I see Kelly's question there. And, I think Kevin answered a lot of that. But just this idea that, how do we create and set a tone and a culture within our institutions where we're having this alum from day one idea, that people feel that they're part of this community from the moment they start. And it can seem really scary to a lot of alumni to go and, a lot of students to go and talk to alumni because they seem like, it's just, and we need to kind of break those barriers down, as Kevin was saying. And part of the reason to do that, and one of the reasons why we need to do it, is because we can create a lot of relatable role models. This is important for us, in the classroom, a lot of our students might not see themselves reflected in the people that are up, teaching them. So why not have some of these alumni in? I mean, they're there and, ready to be, and that I think then, allows students to kind of say, that can be me. And they can think about people that they can relate to. They can start connecting. They can start thinking about informational interviews, doing that. And it's just like taking them on a journey to understand. So there's a lot of co-curricular records and things like that happened at universities for students, and passports and things like that. So maybe it's just, there needs to be an alumni section. How do you connect with alumni? How do we, do something that creative?
Yeah, well, and I would say,
sorry, go on.
I was just saying, I would say that there needs to be some level of equivalency too, right? So going back to mentoring, right? There's always, I think, a tendency for deference to alumni and we want to mentor. And yet the other side of that equation is students, right? You can have a ton of people that want to mentor, but if they don't have the student interest, or you haven't defined a way to actually create meaningful conversations, then your mentoring program is going to fail. Your alumni don't feel like they're engaged. So you need some equivalency there when you're talking to students, alumni, and balancing that out.
Yeah, and as you both were sort of talking about that topic, one thing that I was thinking of is basically is there an opportunity to sort of rethink the graduation ceremony, right? Because in a lot of ways, it feels like the climax of that journey, right? Like the end of that journey. And maybe that's actually not the right way to do it, right? Because honestly, this is a lifelong journey, as Maria talks about, right? And that's when your name changes from student to alumni, but maybe there's a way to rethink that to create that sense of a continued journey for students, but maybe that's a topic for a different webinar. I want to actually jump forward, switch gears a little bit and kind of talk about what is transformational philanthropy? What does transformational philanthropy mean to you? I'll probably start with you, Kevin.
Sure. To me, transformational philanthropy is kind of where values, resources, and opportunities for impact intersect, right? It's creating experiences that are fulfilling and rewarding for the individual, that make an impact on the community, and where people feel like they are caught up in something larger than themselves and have had a chance to meaningfully contribute to those outcomes. So to me, that's what transformational philanthropy is.
Great. Maria?
Yeah, it's a great definition. Hard to follow on that one. I mean, we Kevin and I, as you know, we wrote a book chapter in a book called Engaging International Alumni as Strategic Partners. And we wrote that, and it was published early this year, and it was on transformational philanthropy. So we used Lisa Dietland's definition of transformational philanthropy, and she talks about this idea of how it changes the course or creates a tremendous impact on our institutions. And I would go further, and I think we did go further in our book chapter, where we talked about it's not just having that kind of tremendous impact on our institutions, but like by definition would also have this tremendous impact on our alumni, on our students. So it just has this kind of, as Kevin said, you just feel like you're taking on this wave. You're just kind of brought along on this journey to do something that's pretty incredible, that you can actually see visibly that's having an impact on others.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily. So I think sometimes we confuse the word philanthropy with money, and I couch it much larger than that. It's, how is your volunteer service, your time, talent, treasure, connections? How are you contributing that meaningfully? Some of the one of the most transformational experiences I've ever had with alumni is taking a group of 45 alumni from around the globe to repair homes in the wake of Katrina, the bonds that were shared amongst that group. Everyone felt like they contributed. They could see the outcomes that they did, and that the university was brought on that journey with us through our communications. And it led to some significant donations as well. So when you hear the word philanthropy, it's not just money. It's how can you have transformational experiences and make most use of your resources in the opportunities provided.
And in our chapter, we do talk about these kind of three elements that kind of I'm very visual, so it has three elements on there that, and Kevin kind of alluded to all of this idea that you have what we are calling the anchor, which is like the mission of your institution. Then you have what's called the lens, which is like, how you're looking through. And that lens is like your priorities. So what exactly are you prioritizing, emanating from that, from your mission? And then the third aspect is looking at the landscape. So what's the landscape from which you're working? So what's that environment you're working on? What are the resources you have? All those kind of things. So in our book chapter, we have this as like a Venn diagram, so they all kind of overlap, and that's where transformational, the sweet spot is the transformational philanthropy that happens in the middle, when all of this, collides, and then I kind of then thought about it as a funnel too, because there's an opportunity to kind of think about how that kind of narrows what we're doing or right to a transformational philanthropy. And like Kevin, of course, philanthropy, and I talk about it in my book, philanthropy has this really wide meaning. But of course, what might have attracted some people to come today is that they might be thinking of, well, how can we create transformational philanthropy in that kind of more traditional sense of thinking about, from a fundraising and development perspective. And, there's some really good examples, and they don't have to be major donations. And, one of my favorite ones that I do cite in my book is from the University of Victoria, which is one of my alma maters on the west coast of Canada. And they do With Sprinkles campaign. I just think it's just fab. And what they've done is, because, students are at the center of what they do, and they talk about their values, and that's something that emanates. They do a program where people can give small amounts of money around Giving Tuesday. And the idea is it allows students to do things like go on conferences, or allows, clubs to do a particular event. It's just a small pot of money, but it has that kind of transformational effect on that student experience. And so I think it's just kind of like that we're kind of thinking about these things in kind of a very kind of, a good flow, as opposed to thinking about it. It's always like, well, transformation means we have to do something really grand, and we have to build this massive building, and that's going to change people's lives. And those things can change people's lives, but so can the small things, and so can the volunteering, and so can the volunteering experiences that people have.
And I think broadly, you spoke about transformational, not just from the institution's perspective, but also thinking of experiences that we could create that are transformational for alumni themselves, right?
That's right.
And I think that's a really important point. I'm really curious about when you start thinking more alumni-centric, right? When you're thinking about, hey, what do my alumni care about? How can I provide services and experiences that cater to those needs? how do you think that would play a role in transformational philanthropy, in driving more transformational philanthropy? Any thoughts on that, Kevin? Maybe I'll start with you again.
Yeah, so I think as an industry, again, we don't often start with an alum's perspective, right? That's why I wrote the Pots of Water framework for alumni engagement. We don't often say, how are alumni perceiving what we do, right? Like the measures that we have are often measures of behavior, whereas a huge part of engagement is affect, how people think and feel. Yeah. So, when we say, oh, this person didn't donate, they're not really engaged, right? Like that's not it at all. Are they, there's a lot more things that go into it. And the way that alumni make sense of their relationship with us is really involved. It's really complex. And we need to have, that's what my framework is an attempt to do, is to start to understand the basis with which our alumni are understanding how they connect to the university, whether they want to be a part of it, and if so, how they make those decisions. We need to reframe ourselves from saying, like, what do we need alumni to do, to saying, what is it alumni want from us, and how do we involve them in achieving that?
Maria?
Yeah, I just I add on to that, I guess, is to when we're thinking about those three areas, when we were doing our transformational philanthropy chapter, and we looked at the anchor and the lens and the landscape. If you can imagine kind of what emanates from that, so if you can imagine that was like a funnel that you're getting kind of very narrow, and you have your mission and your values of your institution, and then you kind of think, what are your priorities, and then you think about what are your realities of the resources that you have, and then you're at this kind of point. And that's where there's a really great opportunity. If you can imagine what's filtering through what could become an hourglass, it is the alumni that can filter through all of those aspects of that work. And then when the hourglass gets big again, what you're looking at from an anchor perspective is looking at, well, what is the case of support going to be? And we always talk about case of support for our development priorities of the institution. So it's like, well, what's that case for support? And then how are we telling those stories, like what Kevin was saying before? And that becomes like that lens. What are the stories that we're telling, and how can we ensure that our alumni are involved in that storytelling, and that we're not just telling high level stories? Because I think part of it is that sometimes we tell these stories that are somebody who gave, and you can look at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. I mean, I don't know if everybody gets it every day, but you see all these stories, and they're incredible, and it's fantastic, generous stories of philanthropy, people giving hundreds of millions, not just millions, but hundreds of millions. And what that does is it makes us feel that when we want to give because we believe in something, that our small donation of time or our treasure, which is our money, doesn't seem significant. But in fact, it should be seen as being significant. So we need to be telling those stories too about how, and that's why I love the With Sprinkles campaign, is because it allows those stories to be told. And then finally, it's that idea of saying, well, that landscape, that part of that landscape is saying, how are we celebrating this? How are we celebrating all of the kind of the transformation that's happening? How are we letting, that's the whole stewardship thing too. How are we letting people know that the kind of transformation that's had, that this has on others, and that, when you're, fundraising for things, or when they're having some kind of, volunteering effort, you're asking for lots of mentors. People love to talk about and share that they have 1,000 mentors or 500 mentors or whatever the case is. And that's great. But what's the outcome? Like, tell me some of those stories. And that then becomes much more alumni centric. And we're thinking, about that idea. We're not talking at our alumni, we're talking with them.
I think that's a great point. And, I think I just want to also quickly check if there are any questions. It looks like a lot of the audience members have actually contributed great points, and so that's great. And in the interest of time, I'd love to keep going on for hours, and I could keep going, but I think, just to keep our promise of time, I just want to end with a couple of things that we promised. Let me just share my screen real quick. Just want to give a brief introduction to Alma Base as well for those of you, that are new. So honestly, the journey of becoming more alumni-centric is different for each institution because their alumni may care about different things. And it's also hard because each alumni relations professional is typically responsible for engaging thousands, if not tens of thousands of alumni, right? And that's exactly where we come in and help, give with the technology, the expertise, and the software to make this easy and efficient. So, whether you want to create private online communities for your alumni or create content that alumni will find valuable and then measure how that's being consumed, you want to run events, fundraising campaigns, email marketing, that's where AlmaBase can help you create and run those programs, but also measure all of the engagement, not just event attendance and donations, right? And so I think a good way to think about AlmaBase is essentially a set of tools that allow you to create alumni-centric engagement programs for your institution. I'm sure most of you already have a CRM, and typically AlmaBase is like the all-in-one tool that works with your CRM to run successful alumni engagement and fundraising programs. So real quick on AlmaBase, and then the thing that I promised right at the beginning as well. Maria has graciously sort of given us a discount code specifically for the audience of this webinar. Maria, do you want to quickly mention, maybe just like, let me put you on the spot. Give me 2 lines on why people should read your book.
If you want to get alumni inspired and you want to inspire your students and alumni, this is the book for you.
Can I add on that it inspires yourself as a professional? When I was reading it, I was like, yes, this is good.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah. That's so nice. And thank you for being a reviewer for my book. Thanks.
Let's see if there are any questions. I'm just quickly scrolling through.
Kalyana, while you're looking, I think you had promising one thing to do, right? Should we talk about that?
Yes, actually, I think we should talk about that. And one of the things we were discussing before the webinar was basically, hey, can we end with one actionable sort of thing that institutions or people who are attending this webinar can do right away that could be potentially transformational, right? I'll start with you, Maria. What do you think is one thing that the attendees should do immediately after this webinar?
I believe that besides buying my book, the first thing that they should do is, no, just joking. The first thing that they should do is, look at their plan or their priorities, look at those priorities that they're putting there, and then put another box there. And, make it the impact box, the alumni-centric impact box, and say, if we have this outcome, what is the impact on our alumni? And if they do that exercise, I think that would be healthy, a healthy way to then bring some kind of alumni centricity to their work.
Love that idea.
Transformational philanthropy.
I really like that really like that concrete example. For mine, I'm going to cheat a little bit in that it's one question or one thought with a couple caveats to it. So just take stock of what you're doing and why, right? What is the last time that you involved alumni in identifying gaps and ideating those solutions? Are the programmatic rationales you have still valid, particularly after all that has gone on in this recently? What data do you have, and what might it be telling you that you haven't really been listening to yet? And ask yourself, if you were an alumnus or alumna, would you feel personal fulfillment from the opportunities and experiences that you are providing to your alumni? But I really like the concrete box. That was better.
I love reflective questions, Kevin. I love reflective questions, and that's definitely reflective. Yeah, brilliant.
And especially the why question, right? And and in our day-to-day sort of hustle, we tend to forget asking that why question. We're always focused on what and how, and not really the why. And so I think that's a great way to end the webinar, at least in terms of the content that we wanted to speak about. But let's just hang in there for a few more minutes, maybe, to see if anybody has questions. I do want to respect everyone's time. So, if you don't have questions and want to drop off, feel free to do that. Once again, Kevin, Maria, thank you so much for joining me. And if you wouldn't mind just hanging in there for a few more minutes.
And thank you to the audience who
yes, thank you.
Who stayed. Thank you. This has been great.
They're very interactive. I love that.
Yeah, it's been great. I love the points that Anthony made right up front. I know I couldn't reference it back, but like, sort of thinking about how, we should look at students and, how do we, can you, okay, just wanted to make sure you can still hear me. Yeah, thinking of students and how they can be engaged. I think that's a great point. And like, alumni from day one, I think is also, a very, very powerful message, Maria.
Yeah, it's in the book too, as you know.
Yeah.
It's great. I really, great chat. I really enjoyed it. And if anyone has any questions, they can always reach out to us, on LinkedIn.
Right. And if anyone out there is their institution is struggling with any of these things, or needs an outside perspective, we're here to help. So
that's awesome. All right, doesn't look like there are any questions. I mean, the one sort of common sentiment I see on all of the comments is that the conversation was energizing, and I think we all need a little bit of that, given everything that's happened over the last couple of years. So I think that's a good place to end. Thank you so much, Kevin and Maria, for joining me today. This was awesome.
Thank you all. This really was great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.